do various kinds of exciting online tools, websites, apps, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, I think what's great about this intervention into those questions of actually instantiation of the digital is it allows us really to kind of problematize various aspects around computation itself, around various forms of ideological formation, as it were, that computation has packed within it, which include, for example, questions of performability, efficiency, ease of access, digital skills. These are all taken to be goods, and it's great that we can open those up and kind of really kind of question them. Denise, what time can I speak to?
Another 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
I want to keep it around.
Okay, so I'll very briefly gesture towards the issue of the crisis humanities. It is kind of interesting that we have the crisis humanities, issues humanities and crisis, all these articles about how humanities is in such a terrible state. We've got occupations currently in Amsterdam, in LSE, Kings, etc., around the closing of the humanities. And we're, I suppose, quite lucky here that the university has invested in the humanities and allowed us to expand work here. I think we are in a very kind of good place for that, really. But there is a kind of interesting dynamic there that we do want to think about in relation to the way in which the digital humanities are mobilised and the problematic nature of that mobilisation coming particularly from management, of course, who are super excited by the digital humanities. I just want to say it's not that old a term, and that's going to be interesting in itself. Digital humanities does have an older history, of course, computing in the humanities, but the digital humanities itself as a disciplinary formation, I think, is different and does raise different questions that are great to think with and to explore. I'm not going to go into the history of the digital humanities. I would like to say very briefly, if you don't know, this discussion is well worth having a look at Ramsey's notion of type 1 digital humanities versus type 2 digital humanities. It's kind of interesting the way in which the digital humanities has kind of these kind of gatekeepers that are essentially trying to draw boundaries around who is and is not in the digital humanities. You can see here that this is indicated in the literature through a capital DH, which are real digital humanities, a lowercase DH. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting discussion. David Columbia has a nice response to this, which I think is well worth looking at as well. I just want to mention Willem McCarthy. He's quite interesting. He has a particular setup with the digital humanities, and it comes very much out of his experience in the computing humanities. This is the most wonderful diagram. It really is. I was talking to him about it. I think it was maybe Word or something like that. Just really, as a kind of material object in itself, it encodes a certain moment in computational process. I love this outline file. It's fantastic. But anyway. So this was his way of trying to think through what it was that was the shared aspect of digital humanities. And you can see there's so many different disciplines, there's so many different methods. He kind of moved into methodological shared notions or practices would be the way in which one would understand digital humanities. Interestingly, he's moved away from that now, and he talks much more about simulation or modelling as is the major question. But nonetheless, what's very interesting about the digital humanities is it has traditionally been rather anti-theory. It doesn't like being theorised. And many of the kind of early ways of thinking about the digital humanities, disavowed any kind of theoretical contextualisation. I don't think that's so true anymore. And I think that it is good that now the digital humanities are actually engaging with their own research questions, rather than being a service field for other areas. And that's where it becomes, I think, a really important approach. Right, I really can't talk about most of this. I just want to very quickly talk about why we still doing critical digital humanities. I've written elsewhere about a very broad periodisation of the digital humanities, just to allow us to think about how the digital humanities emerge and the kinds of things it does. This notion of a kind of first wave of humanities, archives and tools, very strong, still very kind of predominant in the field. Kind of second wave, the realisation that all digital content needs to be thought about. The web as an archive is kind of an interesting problematic. Interfaces themselves as a question, of course, even APIs and stuff like that. And lastly, really a kind of question of the materiality of the digital itself as a problematic of the digital humanities. That question of the inscription, the trace, as a supplement to a certain extent. But really that kind of general question of the material turn, I think is kind of like really important for the digital humanities to turn to and for us to contribute to. In relation to this also, the notion of cultural critique, Alan used work, if you're not familiar with it, absolutely fantastic, asking why it is the digital humanities up to now hasn't really engaged very strongly with questions of cultural critique and how it can refer to and build on some of that kind of excellent work. This is the move to the digital humanities. So I'll work about that, I'm just looking for a good place to sort of stop, really. So what I might do is literally just jump to the end, because there are some... No, I won't. I'll end on the photographs, because the photographs are great. So, for example, some of the questions of materiality that I think are really pressing, really interesting, and some of my recent work has been about, is the question of archives themselves. As things become computerized, as the archives become computational, it raises really interesting questions about what it is to store memory, what it is to have access to those kind of memories, and how those memories function. I love this building. It's the British Library National Newspaper Building. And what's weird about it is it actually has a reduced oxygen level, which makes it kind of anti-human as an environment for scholars. I think you were saying, Tim, that it would be great for practicing if you're a mountaineer, essentially. Exactly. And this notion of those kinds of spaces being anti-human, I think, or sort of the digital becomes the predominant mediation for the archives, because the archives themselves are cut off. I think it's an interesting kind of question that we can refer to. You can see these spaces are very bizarrely laid out, they're very computational, they use lots of robots and things, because obviously you don't want humans going in there and knocking it all up. And there's various examples of these, loads of these kinds of libraries all over the place. And so I was going to talk about the mechanical curator, I think, later, if I remember right from the program. This also, this question of computational curation, what it means to curate. The question of curation itself as a kind of problematic of our time. Frederick Jameson's written a very wonderful piece on the aesthetics of the singularity, and he talks about curation as being a kind of key part. And again, this is, I think, part of the research agenda that we definitely want to contribute to. So I'll stop there, even though I'm only on slide 35.